Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's event hosted by the Warsaw Institute, EU-China Relations, State of Play and Geopolitical Implications. My name is Maciej Tyburski and I will be moderating today's debate. Hereby, I extend my very warm welcome to my today's distinguished guests. First, Paulina Jarocińska, PhD candidate at the East China Normal University in Shanghai. Good evening, Paulina.
Good evening, Maciej.
And Mr. Łukasz Kobierski, president of the Institute of New Europe. Łukasz, good to have you on board.
Good evening. Thank you for your invitation.
Thank you very much. I think we can start our interesting debate. Dear panelists, we know that the relations between EU and China are still evolving. They have evolved a lot. We'll discuss today in which direction and what are the areas of this cooperation. But those areas are still pretty complicated and complex. Therefore, I want to address you with the first introductory question to our debate. I want to ask you the question of current state of play in those relations and what are the trends and primary areas of cooperation. We'll start with Paulina Jarocińska. Paulina, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Maciej, for the question. So, as you said, I totally agree that EU-China relations are marked by mix of cooperations, competition, and tensions across various fronts. And I would say the main primary area of cooperation, it's still connected with economic ties. The EU and China are each other largest trading partners as for 2023. And maybe for me, here, it may be worth going back to past events, because for me, as I think, many people think that pandemic and even the occurrence of the war were the flashpoint in my opinion, deterioration of these relations. But actually, I think that this process started much earlier. And in 2016, 3 years later, after making a strategic cooperation document, we have seen some frustration, and it is seen almost for a decade. And EU felt some considerations about security, market security, and they made an updated document with EU strategy. And it was less positive. They were more highlighting reciprocity approach and more focused on China global ambitions. And the EU sees China as a partner for cooperation and economic competitor and systemic rival. And what is more interesting, before and during the summit, EU-China summit that has been taking place in December, the Chinese side emphasized that they're partners, no rivals. And during the summit, the main focus was on reducing the trade imbalance, which was approximately minus $300-400. So the main focus was establish fair competition and balance the trade relations. She opened a summit with, I would say, very rosy statement that EU and China are only international relation, powers in international relations that support multipolarity. And also the meeting was focused on other issues like electric vehicles, subsidies, climate change, human rights, and Ukraine-Russian war. So these are the main focus of the cooperation. So Brussels and EU capitals seem to increasingly convert the idea of de-risking relations right now, and limit with China essentially limiting the EU vulnerability. So the EU main concern is the risking drive, anti-subsidy probe, and China's position on Russia, Ukraine war, and Middle East.
Thank you very much, Paulina, especially for outlining the outcome of the summit. Now I will give the floor to Łukasz Kobierski with the same question of state of play, trends, and primary areas of cooperation. Łukasz, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So maybe I will describe in short a few trends, what I see from EU side, because I think China side is also interesting, what they thinking. But today, primary, I will go with EU and EU side forecast, etc. So what I see is more and more opens formal investigation towards China technologies or subsidiary of China state-owned companies. There are two examples from last few days and third from October last year. So firstly, EU starts a probe on subsidiary of China state-owned rail giant CRRC. So this the first time the EU invokes in the new foreign subsides regulation. So this foreign subsides regulation came last year in July 2023 and start applied that day. So after, let's say, more than half year, we have first probe against China. So that's one of the example. And secondly, the European Union will investigate whether by ByteDance TikTok breached online content rules aimed at protecting children and ensuring transparent advertising. So that's second example. And the third, which I mentioned in October last year, the European Commission launched an investigation into Chinese electric vehicles and whether the makers receive subsidies that break international trade laws and harm EU firms. So that's back and forth the topic about electronic vehicles and also subsidiary generally, which goes from the Chinese Communist Party to companies in China. So that's the big issue for EU, as I see from like several months. What also mentioned Paulina about the economy. So I think trade generally is the primary area of cooperation. Like we don't have the great numbers from last year. Till now, we're waiting for the numbers. But for example, but might be trend is I think the same. But as we see in the data from 2022, China was the third largest partner for EU export of goods and the largest partner for EU imports of goods. So, but another problem for EU, like as we see the timeline from the 2018 to 2022, the EU bilateral trade deficit with China increased from around 150 billion to around 400 billions. So it's driven primarily by a strong rise in EU importers from China. Of course, there are some examples that like only Ireland had a trade surplus with China and other members had a trade deficit with China. So the largest deficit was held by Netherlands, then Italy, and third by Poland. So also Poland have like problem with deficit with trading with China. And so generally, as I said, within EU and China talks remains as a dialogue of the diff, but also we see increasing realism in Europe approach to China. And in my opinion, that will be continued. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Łukasz, for sharing your insights with us and for the interesting fact about Ireland. Both of you mentioned the key area of cooperation as a trade. We spoke about state of play and the trends. Now I want to move to another question connected with threats and risks that may derive from the cooperation. And here I will stay with Łukasz Kobierski for the same question. Łukasz, what are the risks and threats in your opinion?
Okay, so what I see, the risk I see on the economy of EU. So what I said a bit before, that trade deficit and also addiction to Chinese products, especially high tech products, and we seen that China has achieved dominance in the advanced sectors, which we European firms once led. So, like wind turbines or solar energy. Another such sector is in the cars industry. China focus on battery-powered electric vehicles, and few brands are world class, from like BID and others. So that's the problem from the, especially for Germany's car companies, but also others companies which are working with the in the car industry. And the problem is because these cars are cheaper than Western, and the Chinese firm became dominant through the mixture of subsidies and coercive transfers of foreign technologies, but also they hard work on the foresight. And this dominance harms local industries in Europe generally. Also, one of the another like concern raised by EU is the restriction of export of rare earth minerals, which are necessary for production of, for example, photovoltaic panels and other high-tech technologies. So we think that there's some kind of problems which Communist Party preparing for buying to and export to another countries, and EU for sure will face it next months and years on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Łukasz. Thank you for touching the topic of minerals' role in energy installations and addiction to high-tech products. And now I will give the floor to Paulina Jarocińska with the same question of risk and threats that may derive from the cooperation between EU and China. Please, Paulina.
Okay, thank you, Maciej, for the questions. So mostly, well, like totally, I agree with Łukasz. For me, like the most important thing is like market access and fair competition, because there is a risk, very huge risk, that China may not provide equal market access to EU companies, or maybe it will engage in unfair trade practices, as we see already, such a dumping or subsidizing its industries, which could harm like European businesses. And actually, like for anti-dumping investigations, like the EU have like the biggest amount in the world of investigations against China. The other thing I'm concerning about it's the EU's alignment with Western allies, such as the US, and in geopolitical matters, maybe it could create some frictions with China. For instance, maybe like China Belt and Road initiative, and maybe it can make impact cooperation. Because like still we can see that European Union, even if it's like very willing to cooperate with China, they're still like pro-US, like most of the countries are NATO members. The third thing, like what Łukasz said, it's about some high tech. I think about cybersecurity concerns, like with the increasing digitalization of economy. Maybe it can be some concern about cybersecurity threats originating from China. And the other thing, like like relying on China for certain critical supplies or technologies, as Łukasz also said, could pose risk to EU strategic autonomy and resilience, especially in times of geopolitical tension or disruptions in the global supply chain. And also, like, we should see what China will do, what kind of steps China will take regarding like the war in Ukraine. Because at the beginning, like everyone thought that China is like the perfect mediator, and it was acknowledged as a constructive mediator role. Later on, like this constructive mediator role, it's not like in the cards. So, in my opinion, like also the China, the steps that they will make, like revolving this conflict, it also may pose some risks. Like maybe it, like if China will openly help Russia, it may like occur the trade war. But I think it's not gonna happen. Okay, thank you, Maciej.
Thank you very much, Paulina. In your answer, you've mentioned the Russian invasion on Ukraine, and hereby I want to move with both of you to that topic. We all know that Russian ties with China are close. In recent years, we had a lot of high-level meetings between Russia and China. For example, in November 2023, we had a meeting between Minister Shoigu, Lavrov, and General Zhang Youxia. Earlier in April, we had a meeting between Defense Minister Li Shangfu and the Russian representatives. Even when we look at the economic cooperation, it reached over $200 billion, and it's really flourishing. Therefore, I want to ask you, how do those ties between Moscow and Beijing, how do they influence the relation between EU and China? And here, of course, we can mention that the war has impacted EU's perception on the regions like Western Balkans that are strategically important for EU from security perspective, and also for China from investments or loans perspective. So now I will give the floor to Paulina Jarocińska, as I mentioned, with the question of the impact of Russian ties with China on the cooperation between China and EU.
Okay, Maciej, thank you for the question. So, first of all, in my opinion, I think that the European side, mostly the EU side, is pressuring China to take actions that it will not be taken. And what is the most important, like in the official narrative, China does not support the war and like does not recognize anyone's side. Like they have this kind of not interviewing policy in like domestic like relations on each other countries, but delving deeper into Chinese sources and what politics are saying, it is known that the Chinese side is more pro-Russian. I believe that like the main thing that it affects the cooperation, maybe it is how do we see China now, like okay, so for example, I would say that some countries like okay, maybe let's say for example Viktor Orban, like the Hungary, like it doesn't affect the cooperation actually at all. So maybe we should take a deeper look, not into EU as a whole, but the countries one by one. So maybe some countries like Poland and so on, they change their narrative like against China. But on the other hand, like some of them, like Eastern countries, I would say like Hungary, they're going more east, and they want to cooperate with China. Also, in case, for example, of Poland, like we can see interesting thing, like during the Olympic Games, after the war already occurred, many of policymakers, many of politics didn't come to the opening of the Olympics, but actually, like the Polish president Andrzej Duda came. So also, like we can see some kind of dualism in Polish politics in case of China. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paulina. Now I will give the floor to Łukasz Kobierski with the same question of Chinese ties with Russia and its impact on EU-China cooperation. Łukasz, the floor is yours.
Okay, so two additional comments, because Maciej, you say that about the meeting of the Li Shangfu with Shoigu last year. They also have video call this year in the end of January. So cooperation is still ongoing, I would say. And Paulina mentioned about our president who visited China, like that was before the war of Ukraine in Ukraine, but a few weeks before, and probably as we see, it's possible that Andrzej Duda will also visit China this year. So we waiting for confirmation, but just two things as I thought that might be interesting. Okay, when it goes to Russia and China cooperation support, etc. I want to start with some facts on the beginning. PRC, so people of Republic of China, helped Russia avoid sanction, increasing import of the hydrocarbons, thus helping Russia to finance the war, and even provided Russian military with equipment, not direct sometimes, but also not heavy weapon, but dual use equipment, like for example, hundreds of thousands of bulletproof vest and helmets, commercial drones that enable ground forces to identify and dial in targets, and thermal optic sights that enable fighters to shoot more accurately at night. So that's what political news websites reported. And what is the EU position? So EU position on Russia invasion of Ukraine, I think, has never been so clear like now, and demanding that China stop providing weapon or dual-use equipment to Russia. So the EU cautioned that some Chinese companies providing such weapons may be sanctioned. So Brussels currently preparing to sanction for Chinese entities, which it believes are helping the Kremlin, but European dual-use goods, according, like that's we know about according to draft of proposal, and EU want to finalize it as a 13 package of sanction against Russia before February 24th, which of course would mark 2 years since Putin ordered the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So we're waiting for is EU will do it or not. I think they will. And as I see, as I mentioned, EU countries and authorities see China's support of Russia, but especially I think our region, Central Europe, which we got hit hardest because of the war, and our public sentiment towards China also declining, as data show, not only in Central Europe but generally in the Western countries. So in the end, the support for Russia by Chinese Communist Party, I think it's not good idea. Like for them, if they want have more publicity, but good publicity in EU. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Łukasz. Thanks to both of you for bringing the example of Poland, as we are a Polish-based think tank. I think our viewers will appreciate it. We have a question from one of our viewers. This is pretty long, but I will try to make it more brief for you. So I will shortly introduce the case. One of the problems for EU is are restrictions, environmental restrictions connected with energy and production, which leads to expensive costs of production, and it's difficult to compare it to other parts of world, whereas other parts are cheaper and EU makes it more and more expensive. Additionally, China has an access to rare earths, and it makes it more of economic competitor to EU. And I want to ask you, what would be the best scenario for EU in that case? Should European Union reduce environmental legislation to make production easier and cheaper, or should EU impose sanctions on China? I will
Okay,
give the floor
maybe.
here to Łukasz Kobierski. Yes.
Okay, sure. Because I mentioned about earth minerals, so maybe I can answer. So I don't think it's a good idea to change the law of EU on that case, because as we see trend in EU, like fighting with global warming, etc., doing better things for our climate, etc. So even doesn't matter what I thinking and the other thinkings, but on that case, EU in the end they will not change this law or laws um, on earth ray minerals, and because the question was about China, I think it's not only China have these minerals, and we can try finding in other places like US or Australia, giving additional funding for their companies to like establish uh, new places for digging these minerals, etc. And I think what is necessary to check where they are, how many they are, like these minerals, and from where we can get it. Because mostly we're talking about China in this case, because that was easier and cheaper, but the time of cheapest things and minerals, I think's gone. If we want to have like not only partner with we get something like in the 90% or 100%, we should more be balanced on that. Like even in EU, or generally in the Western countries, we have we talking about policy like China plus one. So China as a partner, but also plus one other or others countries which we can also like buying import some minerals or other stuff, etc. So that's generally my answer on that.
Thank you very much for sharing your views with us and our followers. Definitely, EU climate policy will touch a lot of countries, especially of Central and Eastern Europe, when it comes to costs and challenges. Now, I will give the floor with the same question to Paulina Jarocińska. The question of either reducing environmental legislation in EU to make it easier and cheaper, or putting sanctions on China. Please, Paulina, the floor is
Okay,
yours.
thank you so much for questions. Like mostly, I do agree with Łukasz that actually like some kind of sanctions and changing the policy will not happen. I heard that European Commission like is about to propose like some kind of critical raw materials act, and like it was expected to include like set the goal of like mining, recycling, and processing materials. Um, I believe that if it's done like by a smart way, it can be treated as a priority, but also they must like shape the foreign policy and like maybe implement and shape policy coordinated with some external patterns. So as Łukasz already mentioned, like the EU and the United States, they were talking about also material like raw materials trade agreement. So this is like the right direction, and like the diversification of sources should be followed by reaching to other uh, like minded partners that we can cooperate with.
Thank you very much, Paulina. That was an interesting insight from your side. Dear panelists, we spoke a lot about challenges, we spoke about threats, we spoke about trends. Now I want to ask you about a short prediction or forecast for the future, as the 2024 started 2 months ago. My question is, knowing what's happening now, knowing all the implications and the geopolitical situation, what can we expect in the future when it comes to EU-China relations? Will they evolve or will they deteriorate? Łukasz Kobierski, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for the question. So, in my opinion, I thinking that will deteriorating because, as I mentioned, we seen increasing realism in Europe approach to China. In another hand, China trying be more polite as showing openness for example, visas free travel, like for example, holders of ordinary passports from France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Spain may enter China visa free for business, tourism, visiting, etc. For more than 15 days. So that's one of the possibility how China try influence in Europe. Not maybe big deal, but a little bit. Uh, Another problem, like for EU and China relation, is values such as human rights, democratic principles, stand as a. I think it stands as potential friction points, particularly regarding China records, and it's many times mentioned by EU authorities. However, collaboration on global issue might be possible. And example, like war in the Gaza Strip and prevention of climate changes are two primary areas of cooperation in spite of strategic differences. So, for example, in the meeting on the line China EU, which happened like last year in December, representatives of both parties agreed that cooperation in the main to protect civilians and create Palestinian state is crucial. Crucial. Also, European authorities try to convince Beijing to restrict production of methane and pollution, which the global efforts to prevent the climate changes. So, generally, I think it will be going worse, of course, because also influence US in EU or generally in Europe, but there are some also possibility to cooperate each other. Thanks.
Thank you very much. As you've mentioned, the state of human rights in China and the constraints for citizens will definitely be a bottleneck in the future when it comes to deteriorating the relations. Now I will move to Paulina Jarocińska with the same question of prediction of the relations. Do you agree with Łukasz, or you have a different opinion on that? Please, Paulina.
In my opinion, it's a little bit hard to decide for me whether it will be deteriorating or maybe it will stay as it is. I would say that I will compare it like some kind of a freezer. Like last time, like China and EU, for example, were planning to sign a EU-China comprehensive agreement on investments, but because of some reasons, like it was put into the freezer. So for the EU, like the most important thing is to assert is like manage its affairs and take proactive steps to bolster industrial capabilities and establish clear boundaries and strategies, like engaging like closely with industry stakeholders, like also securing their own market. Like this is the order of the day in the EU's China policy, that they are not pursuing a broad decoupling or continuing the dialogue of the deaf. It is the dialogue of the deaf is something that the Joseph Borrell, the High Representative for Foreign Affairs, said last or like 2 years ago. And Beijing also seems, in my opinion, to lack with convincing vision for a constructive engagement with the EU. So, like, regardless of how speedily member states come together, the EU needs to prepare for like some uncertain times ahead and implement the building blocks and decide what is actually the risking agenda. What's more, I would say that also the like whether it's gonna deteriorate or evolve, it also depends on each other's country. So as an example, I will take the Belt and Road Initiative and also cooperation on East and Central European countries. So this is something that many countries have been hoping for some huge number of investments, but actually in fact it's not look like that. Like we saw that Italy left the Belt and Road Initiative, also Lithuania, and afterwards Estonia and Latvia, they also left cooperation of the CEE countries. So I would say that some of them, like, they are not counting for a big progress within like Chinese cooperating with Chinese. From the other side, like for example Hungary, they're still like very willingly open for China and like pursuing some investments. So I would say that mostly like this Belt and Road Initiative and C countries cooperations, it seems like it was some kind of strategy to make good relations with these countries, maybe some kinds of soft power. But afterwards, like we didn't find like even a country, European country, that wanted to host the CE countries China summit. So like to sum up, I would say that maybe mostly it will deteriorate or it will be put into the freezer, as I said before. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulina. Thank you for interesting metaphor with the freezer, which exemplifies what's going on in those complicated relations. Łukasz, Paulina, I want to thank you so much for today's very interesting debate, for your insight. We touched the topic of energy, we've touched the topic of geopolitics, of human rights, of high tech. So thank you very much for that. I want to wish you and our followers a really nice evening. And once again, thank you very much for participation in today's event, and see you next time.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Maciej. Thank you for invitation.
See you. Thank you.